because we're like on the crisp, no, the crust.
Cusp.
Thanks. I appreciate
Crisp is when you bite into a good apple.
After 9 o'clock, I like start having like mini TIAs. I should have like prefaced the beginning of the episode with this.
Welcome to Let's Lime.
Let's Lime is a fresh collaboration between NFJC and the Cardio Nerds.
LIME stands for Leadership and Innovation in Medicine and Education.
To lime also means to hang out with your friends.
We sit down with some of today's visionaries in medicine to talk leadership, education, drive, and more.
We are your hosts, Caitlin Blashart and Justin Burke.
All right, let's lime.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the second episode of Let's Lime. Let's Lime is a joint initiative between members of the Cardio Nerds Academy and the Nephrology Social Media Collective. We sit down with some of today's top influencers in medicine and education to learn about how and why they do what they do. I'm Caitlin Blashart and I co-host Let's Lime with Justin Burke. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce two new members to our team, Gurleen Kaur and Dr. Avital Glasser. Gurleen is a member of the Cardio Nerds Academy, and she'll feed in questions from the live audience during the episode. And Dr. Glasser is a hospitalist and an active contributor to the online MedEd community. She serves as a senior advisor for Let's Lime. So I'll turn it over now to my co-host, Justin, to introduce our guests.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. I'd now like to welcome our guests for today, Dr. Shreya Trivedi and Adam Rodman. Dr. Shreya Trivedi is an internist at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and the chief executive producer of the Core IM podcast, one of the most popular medical podcasts with multiple different segments covering clinical pearls, diagnostic reasoning, and other challenging in medicines. She has been one of the pioneers in podcasts for medical education. We are so excited to have her. She is also just a wonderful human being. Dr. Adam Rodman, also a reasonable human being, is an academic hospitalist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. In his 7th year of hosting Bedside Rounds, a storytelling podcast on medical history and medicine's intersections with society and culture. His enthusiasm for the history of medicine is contagious and will make anyone passionate about the history of syphilis glorify Florence Nightingale and maybe even become a little less of an Osler-phile.
Are you trying to get me hate mail?
I've learned a lot from his podcast as well as Shreya's. We are so excited to have both of them. Among their many endeavors, Drs. Trivedi and Dr. Rodman are the co-founder of the iMED initiative, a new MedEd research lab and an advocacy platform for digital education that has a mission of transforming the way all of us learn about medicine. They held the first annual iMED conference on digital education this past January. And over the course of the next hour or so, we'll learn more about how iMED and podcasting have shaped their journeys in medicine. Caitlin, I'll hand it over to you for the first question.
Thank you. So the first question will be for both of the guests. We want to know, how did you first get involved with digital medical education? And what was your vision when launching iMED?
Shreya,
I was going to say, Shreya, you should go.
Yeah, this is what's going to happen the whole time. By the way, everyone listening, Adam's going to be like, no, Dr. Trivedi. I'll be like, no, Dr. Rodman. Just be like, Adam, take it. But I think that those are two loaded and unique questions in terms of getting involved in digital education and then the iMED initiative. I think both our stories are unique in terms of how we got into digital education. A lot of it stemmed from, I think, just having deep empathy for what I felt like I was missing in medical education. And then really carving out, like, I actually was a huge nerd, by the way, like years ago when I was like sitting at a noon conference on hypothyroidism and someone had 67 slides on everything to know about hypothyroidism. And I was like, oh my God, there is such good literature about good adult learning theory and how we can craft these like great educational experiences. And so a lot of my starting out was just humbling, tinkering around, but like deeply wanting to change some of the learning experiences we have. Adam, I'll let you start with how you got involved, and then maybe you can go into iMED.
Like most things in life, Shreya, you were much more thoughtful and intentional about everything than I am. I stumbled into this space. I started making my podcast before digital education was really a thing. This was like back in 2014. It was a new thing and definitely not in internal medicine. And I did not conceptualize it as education as first. It was a hobby. And my wife has even talked about, oh, when your podcast used to be your hobby, things were different. rather than being my one of my primary ways of teaching. And I started, like, I'll be completely honest, I started doing it for myself. I started trying to create a resource that, not a resource, I started to create something entertaining and educational that I would have liked when I was a resident struggling with some of the, I don't want to say burnout, but some of the demoralization of the realities of clinical medicine when you think you're going to be this Sherlock Holmes like character and then you realize you're mostly writing notes and shuffling things around. So that's why I started, and it turned into something else much later down the line. Shreya, do you want to talk about your/our vision in iMED?
Sure. So iMED came about with a post-it note of thinking about fun, creative titles. But basically, we really are excited to, I think we're the first people in the country to have space with our institution that says, hey, we want to give you this playing ground to play around with some of these ideas, test out some of these ideas, and be advocates for it. And so it's a real blessing to have just supportive mentors and people giving us a little bit of space to play around. And I think, Adam, what would you have anything else to?
You mean conduct rigorous educational I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Adam, I told you have a better pitch than.
No, wait, what was the actual question? What was our vision? Well, sure, that's the really granular vision. And then we have big picture stuff. Do you want me to talk about some of the granular stuff and then we can talk big picture?
Go for it.
Okay, so I guess what iMED is, first of all, it's me and Shreya. No. And we have amazing faculty who are supporting us and people who are working with us, like Stacey Saunders, for example, is helping teach some of our courses. And it's got multiple goals. And Shreya mentioned one of our goals is to actually study the implementation of digital education on the ground, right? Figure out what works, what doesn't work, how this can make learning more effective and more efficient. That's part of it. Another part is that both Dr. Trivedi and I really think, and I'm preaching to the choir here, we teach all these sorts of educational skills to our learners all the time. They learn how to give a good lecture. They learn about adult learning theory. If you actually look at what our learners are using, one of the most popular sources that they're using are digital educational resources, and we don't teach them anything about it. We don't teach people how to use it, first of all. We also don't teach people how to critically appraise it or how to create it themselves. And if you're looking at, this isn't even the future anymore. If you're looking at being an effective medical education in the year 2021, it's not an excuse. You have to have those skills. And that's something that we're doing right now is creating skills curriculums to teach the residents how to be digital educators and consumers of digital education.
Yeah, and so I'd like to follow up with the iMED. This conference you guys put on was innovative and was amazing. And one of the questions that was asked was really what was inspiring or what inspires us about digital education. And many Twitter users, including Dr. Trivedi, had mentioned how these digital platforms have not just revolutionized how we learn, but how we connect and have helped us feel like we have more of a community. And Dr. Rodman, I think your podcast also is not about the algorithm of diagnosing a disease or how to manage basic hypertension, but talks more about the humanistic side of medicine. So could you guys talk about how the podcast platform has created this community or has created this humanistic side of medicine that Dr. Rodman, you've alluded to?
Yeah, I think podcasts, and I would also argue the Twitter community at large has moved the needle in terms of a lot of wicked problems, whether it's burnout, as Adam was alluding to, which is loaded and has many things in the sense of, and it's very hard to measure what the impact of role modeling that happens on podcasts has impacted patient care, or what the impact of people just feeling more connected, feeling like just less alone in their struggles. Hearing, for example, Justin say on air, he struggles with something too. And you're like, oh man, I'm not the only one that struggles with that problem too. So in a granular sense, I think it individually has made an impact. I am amazed and impressed by the larger movements in medicine, whether it's women in medicine, anti-racism, people just being more comfortable, being vulnerable. I think those things I really think digital education is moving the needle in terms of equity in those areas. Maybe only 30% of people at your institution are on Twitter or listening to podcasts, but what's happening is those people are seeing these messages, seeing these narratives, and I believe are feeling more compelled with these messages and going back to the institutions and being champions in this regard. And I think it's an impressive time in medicine. And it's very humbling to be leaders in it and help think about how are we going to continue pushing envelopes in this realm.
Yeah, I'm gonna take with what Shreya said and run with it to an extreme. Okay, actually, this is a question maybe for Caitlin and Justin. What makes this podcast, like Let's Lime or the Cribsiders or the Curbsiders or Core IM, what makes that different than teaching that happened like in the 90s? Like, in your opinion, what's different about it?
I think for me, one of the bigger things is that my level, I'm a second year internal medicine resident. Normally, I wouldn't have this platform. I wouldn't have this kind of ability. They talk a lot about flattening the hierarchy and how that's a major thing that digital education has brought to everything. And I do feel like these things that you're talking about, this community building, I do feel that even as a relatively junior learner. And so I think that's something that definitely, I know a lot of different podcasts are embracing that model of it doesn't matter where you are at your stage of training, it's you're welcome and you're welcome to learn and to participate in creating the content.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the accessibility, I think for me, it's also something that, like Dr. Trivedi, I discovered podcasting in residency when I was trying to find passive ways of learning. And it was just it was a fun way that I could do while doing other things. And I will say, as far as the community component, you talk about it with friends and pick up pearls. And every good resident come up with some little fact that was not well known that I could bring up on rounds so that I sounded smart, which is why we do the work that we do. So that was a joke. It's for patience.
Here's where I'm going to run with both your comments and what Dr. Trivedi said, is that I think what excites me and what is potentially incredibly revolutionary about digital education is that traditionally medical education has happened in very small communities of practice, right? You've got the community of practice around your medical school, which really is very small if you think about the medical school professors. You've got the faculty in your IM department. You've got the wards team, right? It's small, and there's all these sorts of cultural facets and all of those biases that are built into that. What we're looking at now, and what Dr. Trivedi talks about all the time is
it's awful, Adam.
As we're looking at a virtual community of practice that is huge. It is larger than any single individual educational community of practice out there, and it's inclusive. And I don't want to say there's problems, right? I don't want to sugarcoat everything, but it involves learners of all different levels. It involves people from all over the world, people of different backgrounds, and everyone is in this community of practice to teach and to be an educator. And to me, right, this is why I'm excited, because we're, for the first time, I think, in medical educational history, we're talking about having educational communities of practice that span institutions. And it gives us a chance to fight a lot of the things that I think are wrong with medical practice in the 21st century and 20th century, right? So a lot of the cultural things, a lot of the way we treat patients, a lot of the way we frame and talk about disease, a lot of the biases that we bring into it. And Shreya was talking about women in medicine, and in terms of race in medicine as well. A lot of this, we have this platform in this virtual community of practice. And to me, right, there's nothing inherently special about a podcast. People have been making radio programs since the 1930s. There's nothing like an infographic even. What's special about an infographic? Infographics have been around since the 1960s. So it's not the media itself, but it's this amazing virtual community of practice that we're all participating in. And I'll get off my soapbox, but I think it's going to be revolutionary.
And I think leading from that conversation, another something that was brought up at iMED was the relation of this, how digital education fits in with formal medical school curriculums. And how do you think that medical schools, other educators, their residency, is there a role for formal integration, or where do you see that going?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because right now we're operating in kind of these parallel universes where you have your formal didactics and then people on their own do this for their own self-directed learning. I think two things need to happen. One is, I think UME and GME programs, I think UME is starting to get there, but UME and GME programs need to give their trainees the time and the headspace to use these resources that are well curated, have gone through multiple passes, are sometimes with national experts or international experts in this arena, and then be thoughtful about how they're going to use that physical space that they actually share with their learners as thoughtfully as possible, which has to have a little bit more energy, whether it's through creating activities with them or discussions or even games that really help build that collaborative, contextual knowledge even more. I think that's hard though, because the inertia in med ed is so real when all you've seen is people stand up and give PowerPoints, and also teachers are not well compensated, right? It's much easier to throw together 67 slides on hypothyroidism than to think about deliberate cases or learning from a podcast or a tutorial on it, and then asking, oh yeah, what still are your knowledge gaps and what are you really struggling with, and like have precise learning around it. I went on a soapbox myself in terms of I think it's an exciting field, and hopefully we can figure out some of those questions in terms of integration, and hopefully there is a role, and hopefully the answer isn't just that these two worlds are going to live separately 5-10 years from now. We can figure out how each of the worlds can be humble and best serve purposes. Adam, any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. So shocker. I agree with you 100%, Shreya. Right now, in internal medicine, at least, digital education is being used for the most part asynchronously. The emergency medicine world does give us some models, right? They have the III program and approved instructional resources, which allow them to basically replace 1 hour of didactics a week with some form of digital education. I don't know that's the mod. That's definitely not the model that internal medicine is going to go forward with. I cannot see us as internists ever doing that. And I think we need to figure out new things that work, but we're not there yet.
Okay, and I think we have our first question from the audience that Gerline is going to ask now.
Yeah, so now with more people utilizing digital media and contributing to creating med ed podcasts and tutorials and infographics, we had a couple of people wondering, Dr. Devesh Rai and Dr. Mithu Mahesh Varanathan, about how do you document these digital media on CVs? And do you have any tips about how to incorporate them into non-traditional scholarship sections?
Yeah, I think our wonderful colleagues, Avio Glasser, Charlie Ray, Vinny Aurora wrote this great white paper. Adam, I don't know if you can pull it up, but they have a great section in there in terms of citing CVs. But I think I don't know if there's any hardcore format that you have to follow. I don't think there's an APA format, but I think the biggest tip is to include your impact, whether it's download numbers, whether it's I think Twitter gives impressions and then also engagement, right? That ratio for then your supervisors see, oh, this was something that people really engage with, right? That's what institutions care about, is engagement, whether it's in the conferences together or whether it's with a larger medical community and you making an impact that way.
Yeah, and so there are some guidelines on this. So the most comprehensive guidelines again come from the emergency medicine world.
That one's specifically for promotion, I think, but yeah, they might have
It's for
some
CVs, right? I guess the
too.
CV teaching portfolio, we at Harvard, there's no such thing as a teaching portfolio. It's just a CV. I know other institutions are different. But for you and I, Shreya, this is what we would do. And the whole gist of it is what Dr. Trivedi said, is to yes, they should all go. Even Harvard wants it on your CV. Where? You should ask your committee. There's not really standardized resources. Like Mayo, for example, has a standardized section to put it in, but most people do not. Ours goes under either other peer-reviewed media or other non-peer-reviewed media, right? That's literally where we put it on our CV, and you would put tweets there as well. And I know that the Harvard the promotion and tenure committee wants measures of engagement. One of the problems in doing this is that there's not validated measures of engagement really yet, which is one of the things that Dr. Trivedi and I are working on, among many other things.
And with all the things that you guys are working on, I would love to ask about how you balance that and how educators should balance that. We had one Twitter submission from Chris, the Chu Manchu from the Curbsiders, who asked specifically, when working on multiple projects, do you believe in the phrase perfection is the enemy of the good? And as far as just on a day-to-day educator basis, how do you use digital health? How do you balance digital health education with your workload and all the projects you're working on?
I would be lying to you if I told you I didn't struggle with it on a daily basis. And I think the biggest thing, because it's hard because something as a woman in medicine and woman of color, someone who doesn't speak with a lot of lean in authority, I speak with a more nurturing voice. I know I can't get away with a lot of things that other people can. In that sense, it creates a perfectionist tendency in me where I want to be able to deliver with excellence because I know I'm not going to be able to get away with as much as my colleagues might. With that being said, I think the blessing has been to work with people who do not have as much of a perfectionist mentality as
She's talking
me
about me.
and can say, Shreya, let's just submit it. It's fine. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And so that's been finding people like Adam, Marty, other people who can help take some of that load off and reevaluate kind of the perfection that we're striving for, I think has been really helpful, at least for me. Adam, I'm curious what helps you with your perfectionism tendencies.
I don't. The sad
You're
truth,
like, what perfectionism?
no. So the sad truth of one of the very exciting things about digital education, but also a curse, is that you can do it anytime, anywhere. There's not clear bounds on that, which means that you're always like, Shreya has one young child. I have two young children. It means that every single facet of your life ends up like bleeding into one another, and there's not clear boundaries. And I don't know the right way to navigate that either.
Yeah. One thing that's been helpful is just to, like, Adam and I constantly having open conversations about our like moving target schedules. And sometimes we do meet at 9:30 when the kids are sleeping or at a random time on the weekend. But that's been really great to have a
And
forgiving partner in crime.
Oh.
Go for it.
I was gonna say, and for the big picture things, right? So there's, as Shreya and I, we have weekly. Wait, what do we call them?
Oh, we run the
Running
list.
the
You know how
list.
you run the
Yeah.
list with your patients? We try to run the list on our projects, or else inertia happens because your clinical work and then your other teaching responsibilities and then the other things you get asked to do. It's really hard to prioritize also because I think in this new field there's so much you can
Yeah.
do and everything seems to be so important, right? Because we're like on the
Cusp.
Thanks, I
Crisp
appreciate
is when you butt into a good app.
after 9 o'clock I like start having like mini TIAs. I should have like prefaced the beginning of the episode with this. What was he saying? We're on the cusp.
So
We're on the cusp of a lot of change, and so it feels like everything is so important. Every study is, oh yeah, we've got to answer this question and this question. We got to, and then you're like, there's only so much time in the day. What's the most important question we're going to answer and project we're going to do, and then.
Yeah, I was going to actually say that I think that's where the perfectionism comes in. The most useful is not on the like writing this individual paper, but on the big, like, we're two people. There's only so much we can do. We want to advance this field. What do we spend like at the year basis?
I think this is a great opportunity to thank you both for making this a priority and for joining us so we could share a lot of your...
That wasn't the intent of that.
I know you weren't fishing.
Justin's, oh, crap.
No, it is very much appreciated because this is a great project that it's great to have you.
You guys are doing what the Cardio Nerds and the Nephrology Social Media Collective are doing. Also, this is another very exciting model for training digital educators. We're really excited about this.
One thing I love about digital education is that I'm like on this like fierce, like anti-traditional path right now, anti-patriarchy today. But I just feel like with digital education, we have space to break away from things that we don't like in traditional academia. For example, there's just so many things in traditional academia. I have a love-hate relationship, as you can tell, that create a scarcity mentality. For example, there has to be one first author. There has to be one last author. There's just a lot of things set up that you feel competitive or you feel like, it's that person's project, I'm not going to help out. Digital education, there's so much collaboration. There's not much ego. At least I hope we can keep it that way, where people are just working together. And so again, as Adam was saying, Let's Lime is just a perfect example of, hey, we both have similar missions. Let's collaborate and not, oh, this is your idea. No, that was my idea. And that just is a wonderful space that I think we hopefully can continue to keep it being that positive and collaborative.
Yeah, it's also a small field right now. I think we know everybody in it, right? Like the reason that everybody here knows each other.
It's true.
And it's growing with all of the interns on the line and everyone who's moving into the space. It's really great to see and to feel being part of that change. I guess talking about multiple things that you guys are taking on, I wanted to ask briefly about your respective podcasts, the ones that you started out with, Core IM and Bedside Rounds. On the tangent, what you were mentioning about being able to focus on what it is that you like about it, I wanted to ask what have been so far your favorite or most successful episodes, and what do you think have made those experiences so great or those episodes so successful?
Go for Adam.
Me? You want me to go? I have to pull up the exact episode number. Okay. That's easy. I know my favorite episode. It's a couple years old. It's episode 43, The Cursed, and it is it's like a meta epistemological explanation or exploration of the death of Charles II of Spain. So this is one of the Spanish Habsburgs, horrifically inbred. And when he died, there was this absolutely crazy autopsy that he had like a heart the size of a peppercorn. What else was there? Like his head was full of water, like all these very bizarre autopsy findings. And this has been like an obsession of paleopathologists. Like, what did Charles II actually die of? And I use that framing as a drop-off point to talk not only about in medicine, we like to talk about scientific progress. I'm a skeptic as to whether scientific progress exists. So I actually use this as a frame to not talk about scientific progress, but to talk about epistemological progress or epistemological change or epistemic shift, and like how the very ways that doctors have visualized disease in human body have changed over time and continue to change while we practice, and why that makes it so hard for us to look back at something from the 15th century and say what he died from. So that's been one of my I think I looked at it. It's a popular subject. I had a lot of fun doing it, but it brings up a lot of post-structural philosophical ideas that you don't normally hear about in medicine.
Awesome. Adam, I'm like just impressed by your historical.
My latest grand rounds questioned the concept of the existence of pneumonia. So
what do we actually know about diagnosis? On a Friday morning at 8 a.m. It was great. I think, yeah, Core IM, it's hard to pick. There are so many. It's like picking from your children. The most popular episodes are always going to be the 5 pearls on heart failure, nephrotic syndrome, cardio, and nephrology plugs. But actually, my favorite are always the hoofbeats episodes that go, I feel like John and Cindy are like the sports commentator as people are dissecting cases. And it's, to me, like, it's so great learning from their reflections. And when I first started listening to Hoofbeats and crafting the vision with them, I didn't know what was going to come of it. I didn't know that so many people around the country were just going to like email us, hey, I feel so much better about the pain points of diagnosing now that I've listened to Hoofbeats, or even just like this was the best. I think this episode was 2 years ago in August. There was one of the Hoofbeats episode. We did like 20 questions format. I don't know if you guys ever played the game 20 questions, but it was so fun. And then afterwards, like 20 residency programs also adopted that for their morning report also. And so it was just like the reason why I started the podcast was to good instructional design that I really cared about and believed in with learning science. And then it's just so humbling to hear people around the country then adopt that pedagogy, and that, yes, you can learn clinical pearls, but you can also role model good pedagogy. And so that was, made me feel like all the hours are totally worth it.
Yeah, so we have a question from Dr. Katie Rizzolo, who is an NSMC intern. So she's asking about how creating digital media takes a lot of time, and it's time away from your clinical duties and other things you're responsible for in the hospital. So how do you advocate for protecting your time from your employer and from your institutions, and how do you make that all work?
That is hard, especially because this field is so new. It's hard just even being a medical educator and getting protected time as well. I think my best advice I can give is to think of something you're passionate about that is digital education adjacent, right? If you can get a role or protected time helping out with conferences or curriculum design or something that you can maybe make count twice in the digital space, I think is maybe the most practical advice we have at the moment. Maybe years down the line, there'll be more protected time for this. But Adam, do you have any other strategies of getting time?
I think that going forward in the next couple of years, teaching these skills to residents is going to be something that is in demand by residencies, and particularly because the residents themselves will demand these skills. So for this group here in particular, I think this is like going to be a hard sell to anybody, but to talk about creating curriculum, again, something that exists, what Shreya is saying, something that exists tangential to the digital education itself, in this case, skills that you guys are gaining now. There's not a model. We're making this up as we go along. That's the TLDR of this.
Yeah. Like most things in life.
I think these are very inspirational stories for a lot of us in medical education. And one thing that Dr. Rodman, you had mentioned on Bedside Rounds, the seminar, The House of Pod, how medical podcasting made me a better doctor and educator. And you talked about how the evolution of podcasting has, for you, paralleled your growth as a physician. And Dr. Trivedi, it sounds like you too have seen maybe growth as an educator also in some of the milestones of your podcast. Could you guys talk about just your experience from when you were first doing podcasting to now and the evolution that you've seen in your careers or in the podcast themselves?
That's quite a question. Shreya, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can speak for me and I can speak for everyone I feel like I've worked with on podcasts. I think I've become such a better educator and I want to say a researcher and writer. It's funny how I did a research fellowship before taking this job. And I found that like when I was writing the discussion section or the conclusions, I was tapping into things I've learned from script writing and what makes good audio to what makes compelling writing. And then sometimes I was using my like wordsmithing that I put on for doing research with my educator with the podcasting aspect of it. Yeah, I would say I've tremendously changed how I teach. One thing I've adopted is I used to think like chalk talks were these things that were modeled to me. Now that I think of podcasting as like narratives and stories and like audio experiences, I've started to think about teaching as also you're telling a narrative or a story about, say, nephrotic syndrome. And I've broken away from the chalk talks that I've known to get myself. And so it's just made me more creative in many aspects of my life.
That's so Shreya, I've actually completely abandoned chalk talks, I think, because of my experience. I don't do chalk talks anymore.
Thumbs up.
Yeah. So Justin, I think this is such a tough question, right? But I think podcasting and the process of interrogating a lot of the assumptions that we all made has made me much more intentional as a physician, much more thoughtful, much more much more very interested in talking about evidence and really thinking about my patients' preferences. And I think digital education has a way of making you more intentional in your medical practice itself, just because again, it's a virtual community of practice. You put together a lecture for the residents, you update your slide once a year, and you probably don't add that much more. But whenever I create something, it's with the knowledge that it's going out there for tens of thousands of people who are going to interact with it and get back to me. And it just means that and I know Dr. Trivedi feels like this also, right? It puts up the expectations much higher, but it makes you very intentional about what you're doing. And I think that translates into other parts of my medical practice.
Dr. Rodman, a quick follow-up. When you're on rounds and someone asks the questions about heart failure, do you ever go back to, okay, guys, in the 1920s, imagine you're in Vienna.
Sunny tubes. Oh my God, yes. So first of all, I have the residents still send them around. I write these emails. So a lot of my teaching are these #AngryAdam rants. I hashtag them so I can find them very easily. I've written about 80 of them. So we'll get a clinical question and then I'll do a deep dive into not only what the answer is, but how do we know what the answer is? Because that's what I want to get across, right? Knowledge is contingent. Oh my God. If a resident ever tells me that LASIK is not an evidence-based therapy for heart failure, I just want to, makes me so mad. I'm like, what is evidence, guys? Come on. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting on a rant here. So I have these ranty emails that I research basically after we're done rounding and I send them out to the teams. And that's most of my ward teaching.
Nice.
Thank you for sharing the episodes that were most memorable to you. We have a related question to going back to podcasts from Kader. He's asking what should be the ideal duration for a podcast? And do you think the audience usually wants an attractive point or a hook at the beginning to get them interested?
The last one's easy. You can, if I had my login here, I could show you you can see a clear drop off in listens. If someone's going to, wait, I should rephrase it. If someone's going to listen or not, they decide within the first like 2 to 3 minutes if they're going to listen all the way through or not. And that's where you get, and actually it's interesting, Spotify and Pandora and Apple Podcasts, when they give you your data, they actually take out there's like initial people that only listened for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And then, so 100% yes. Think of it. Yeah, you want to make that beginning as compelling as possible. Ideal duration, yeah, that's EM people did a survey study around it. I think it was around 30 minutes or so. But I think it's variable in terms of, I know a lot of people listen to the Curbsiders, which is usually an hour long, but they listen on their commute on the way to work and on the way back. So I think it just depends.
Okay, and then I have a question more directed at Dr. Trivedi. Like you, I think I'm a big fan of graphical communication in MedEd. And many podcasts, such as yours, have championed the use of infographics, other visual materials to relay concepts more in a snapshot visual view. And I was wondering, since you're one of the leaders in this space, I wanted to ask, how do you decide what makes a good graphical kind of content, what makes good auditory content? How do you decide when to use one or both? And how do you think graphical communication more broadly fits into the digital education space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So thinking about audio versus visual, right? Audio can communicate emotions, can communicate connections, can make you feel a part of something. And that's the beauty and the intangible of audio that visuals will never have, no matter how juicy that infographic is, right? You won't get that human aspect of it. And then thinking about visuals, my litmus test for should this be something in a visual or not is thinking about, will this make the message clearer or will it make the message more memorable? I think the problem a lot of people have now with making infographics is people are just like color happy and you're like, oh, this is something pretty. But I'm like, did it actually make your message more digestible and memorable for someone? Or did you just take words and make it smaller and put nice colors there? And yeah, so in that sense, push yourself to think about, how can I visually actually represent this, use spatial elements to make it easier for someone to come away with it. Last question that you asked was visuals and digital education. Yeah, I think I hope we can continue using visuals more. I hate seeing blocks of text. I don't know about you, but I was even thinking about it with our EMR. I'm like, why am I reading blocks of text? Why this patient story can be represented in a complete visual, make it much easier for every consultant to get the story. That's a health education point, but yeah.
And maybe one question to start closing us out. We've talked about a lot of the great things that you guys have been working on and all the different ways digital medical education exists. What's next for iMED? Can you share some of what you're working on, what the plans are for the future, and how you see this field moving forward?
No, it's top secret. Sorry. No, we are working on way too many projects than we have time for. But something exciting that's actually like coming down the line is we now are going to have a whole digital education track. So classically, there was this whole resident as teacher track. And adjacent to that, there's going to be a whole digital education track where we can work with learners in a longitudinal 2-year manner. And that's, I think, going to be really exciting. We're working on a national survey on self-directed learning and reasons why certain people choose certain resources. But actually that's a kind of a plug. If anyone wants their institution to be a part of the survey and want to be the lead PI, please email us. We're looking to recruit. And Adam, what are other things that we think are exciting that people should know about?
We are continuing our work on how to best integrate digital education into traditional curricula. So we have some randomized control educational trials that are coming. They're relatively small scale for the first year, and with any luck, they'll be much more encompassing in the next couple of years. And then, of course, this is just sounding crazy as we go through everything that we're doing our annual conference, which it looks like is going to probably be in January of next year for the second one, that we hope is going to continue to be a place for digital educators to come together. We were just overwhelmed by how many people and from all different parts of the world came to the first one. And from the fallout of that conference, like I've been talking to educators in India, for example, who are launching a digital education curriculum at Manipal University. So it's like these things things are spreading quickly, right? Things are changing very quick. And with that, who knows? Like there may be other opportunities that come up in the next year that we can't even predict right now.
So with that, I think I'll ask a final question. What takeaways or advice can you give to budding digital health educators? And what are you looking for sort of residents or trainees that are starting along that path?
I think my biggest advice is nobody can be a better you than you. You might see what other people have done. You might see Tony Brew and, oh man, Tony Brew is so great. I got to write tutorials like him. Oh, Adam Rodman, he knows so much about history. I got to talk like him and then research like him. You have your own unique strengths and really sink into them and think about how you want to contribute to digital education in that way. I think that's what I would have told my younger self. Oftentimes I beat myself up about how much I think about things and how much I have so much empathy for everything. But now I'm like, oh my God, that's my biggest strength. I use that to create this great these great episodes, to having deep empathy for the end user, like what's going to make a great end product. And so, yeah, that's my biggest takeaway for myself. And hopefully I can inspire other people to sink into what makes them unique and really relish that.
And I agree with Shreya, but I'll build off of what she said to go back to this idea of this being a whole community of practice, is that for the budding digital educator should not go at it alone, right? They should know that there's all of these people out here who are excited about the field and want to help them. And one of the nice things about digital education, it happens in platforms, not podcasting as much, but Twitter, for example, that are inherently communities, right? Med Twitter is any teaching you do through is inherently community based. So there are very informal ways to do that. You can tag people, but you can also just ask, right? I know that Tony, if anybody ever asks him for advice on how, like, making a tutorial, he will help them. Like, everyone in this field is doing this. No one is making money in this field. We're doing it because we're excited about it and we think it's important, and we think it's going to change medical education. So reach out, guys. And Dr. Trivedi and I are here as well, right? There's lots of us out here.
This has been really inspiring, and it's such a great opportunity to have both of you, who I have looked up to and mentored, has been a mentee of, with Shreya being an incredible, strong leader and seeing how she has navigated so many challenges. And Dr. Rodman, Adam, your constant enthusiasm for kind of medicine and the broad perspective is very re-energizing a lot of times. And it's beautiful and wonderful. And it's nice that we get to share your passions in this kind of intimate group with people who are budding young digital health experts of the future. And so we're really grateful for you both taking the time, spending it with us. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for creating this space and learning environment for everyone.
Yeah. And I also, just to go back on this, I think the Nephrology Social Media Fellowship and then the Cardio Nerds Academy, it's a wave of the future.